The Vitrian Dragoons are a regiment of guardsmen hailing from the desert world of Vitria in the segmentum Ultima. I was going to make some kind of low-effort Arrakis joke since Dune is about as popular as it's ever been, but I don't know, I feel like the joke's been overdone lately. We'll go with Shifting Sandlands, or maybe the Mojave. Karak? Actually, Karak might be a little too on the nose, but let's not spoil the story here. Vitria was not always the sandy hellhole the residents have come to know and love. It was actually, it was actually way fucking worse. According to the Shield of Baal, Leviathan, a campaign supplement from 7th edition, the Vitria of old was known under a different name, the Death World of Silica 7. Silica, like sand, or the free candy you get in the packaging. Very clever, guys. Silica 7 is not described in great detail. That isn't just, generic desert stuff. Sandstorms, oases, dunes, but apparently that wasn't the real reason for the classification. Now you may be thinking, how could it possibly get worse than a planet of endless desert? Giant saber-toothed tigers. While the harsh conditions of Silica 7 are naturally what you'd think of keeping people from inhabiting a planet, humanity has shown that it has the means and the stubbornness to pretty much inhabit any world they put their mind to. After all, the Tal'Arn are pretty much the poster children of desert guard regiments, and they simply excel at tank warfare because their planet is so irradiated, it's genuinely the safest option. However, as Tal'Arn was irradiated into a lifeless husk, Silica was not so lucky with the giant tigers. The Imperium describes these creatures as tusk felinids, but a pretty elementary dissection of that word gives you something that looks eerily similar to a saber-toothed tiger. I guess it'd be saber-tusked tigers, but since most tusks are just teeth that grow forward, I'm pretty comfortable with sticking to my guns on this description. Also, nothing says that they're giant, but they just look cooler in my head when I think of them as giant, so I'm gonna stick to it. Anyways, towards the end of Silica 7's lifespan, the planet would experience an interesting solar phenomenon. A massive solar flare from the sun apparently reached out far enough to affect the planet, scorching the planet's surface and turning many of its deserts into vast fields of hard, black glass.
Not just any black, jet black.
A common sight associated with the planet in modern times. Part of me wonders how a solar flare would bypass so many planets, especially in the segmentum Solar, and roast only this planet. After all, if we look at the map of the area, assuming Silica was as close as it could be to the segmentum Ultima, many important planets like Ryza, Prospero, and Catachan are in that path. Yet those planets have no lore that I could find that mentions it being burned to a crisp. This solar flare was fairly recent in history too, so I don't know, Scoop. I guess technically space isn't on a flat plane, so hey, I'm not going to argue too much there, but With the planet quite literally glassed, mind you, the Imperium found that the planet was somehow pretty inhabitable by now, with the populations of, giant fucking tigers either being forced underground, displaced to the far side of the planet, or, most likely, a huge portion of their population were just roasted out of existence. The Imperium quickly threw out all records on Silica 7, imported a bunch of idiots to live on this slightly less bad hellhole, and rechristened the planet as Vitria. It was also rechristened into, something much less appealing later down the road, but I'm trying to sell people on the faction. Let's not mention Cadia the sequel, okay? Let's talk about the actual people. The natives of Vitria are reserved folks, with many carrying the wisdom earned in the harsh sands of their world. Many of them are covered in scars from where shards of black glass have cut them, either from harsh sandstorms or from years of training in the desert, and move with caution through the sands. Despite this, though, the Vitrian Dragoons are a highly decorated regiment, showing tremendous power as heavily armored stormtroopers. Each Dragoon is fitted with a suit of Vitria's native volcanic glass, which gives them increased defensive capabilities against energy weapons. With these, they dive into the heart of the fiercest combat zones under the principles of their ancient honor code, the Bihata, a copy of which every Dragoon keeps in a special pocket over their heart. The Bihata states that the first shot should always be the only shot you need, so the Dragoons tear through their ammo supply, with their las weapons always firing at maximum output.
Badass, very badass.
The Vitrian Dragoons are not a very much discussed regiment outside of a damn these would be cool in plastic or models never ever kind of discussion, but they have seen action within campaigns like the Sabbath Worlds Crusade. One Vitrian Dragoon colonel is even very close friends with the Tanith First and Only, as described in the book First and Only. The Dragoons have also been stated to have been deployed in the Solipsis campaign, a joint effort alongside the Volpone Blue Bloods to end the treasonous actions of one Governor Gideon. These days, the only known action the Vitrian Dragoons have seen recently are simple garrison duty, but considering that one time they teamed up with the Kanak Skulltakers and the Savlar Chem Dogs to close a webway breach, and none of them ever came back, makes garrison duty not actually sound that bad if you think about it. As with all the guard kit bashes I've been doing for this series so far, my priority has been to show you how to feasibly start an army of these guys with as much ease as I can. The Vitrian Dragoons in particular, though, are probably the most sculpt heavy we're going to be getting in this 5-part series here, so I tried to look at ways to mitigate this. I couldn't think of anything. However, the actual sculpting itself is fairly easy. Even if you're not a great sculptor, you should be able to manage this, and it doesn't take very long either. For the base of my Dragoons, I choose to once again break out the Master Regiment template from Reptilian Overlords. Not just because I already paid for it, although that does help, but it does superficially resemble the new Cadians, and both of those options are good bases for the plans I've got in store. As with the other guard models I've done previously, my plan is to pose the model in my slicer, G2 box, using the unsupported parts. Then, when I get everything that I want selected, I can just swap in the pre-supported equivalents. I started sifting through the parts with no real concrete idea, besides wanting a pose that doesn't interfere with the viewing of the torso. This will allow me to sculpt the glass armor more easily and actually allow you guys to, see it, which is, I've heard is a bonus. I ended up with a dynamic pose where the guardsman is brandishing his sidearm, or maybe a flare gun of sorts. I also made sure to pick a helmet with a rebreather, as I had planned to recreate the slim visor of the artwork. With the parts picked out and the pre-supported options swapped in, I still take a second to at least apply auto supports. I always do this with pre-supported stuff since I've gotten a lot of pre-supported models that fail to print, even with their supposedly verified supports on it. Very rarely do I have to manually apply supports on a pre-supported model, but hey, you never know, it can vary. I printed these out on my resin printer using a water washable resin. Longtime viewers know of the infamous Nathan that's been consistently relevant in my stories, and he's the one who turned me on to water washable stuff. I'm kind of angry that I didn't switch to it sooner. It's like 27 gorillion times easier to clean up with the little spray nozzle at the kitchen sink and a bucket to catch all the water. With all the parts washed, support damages cleaned up, and the parts cured under my UV lamp, I attach the torso to the legs in preparation for sculpting. The plan is to attach a small layer of green stuff to the body and sculpt a bunch of diagonal lines. When this is done properly, the mini will have a bunch of diamond-shaped sections that'll emulate their signature armor. At least, as best as I can get it. I use my X-Acto knife to sculpt the lines in one direction, then use my flat wedge-shaped sculpting tool to both widen the grooves and sort of round the final shape. Some tips for doing this: use the straightness of the knife blade to your advantage to cut straight lines. When you're using the flat wedge tool, don't press in too hard or you'll distort the rows too much. It's easier to just press it a little bit now, then refine the rows a little more once both directions have been cut in. Finally, if you're a fantasy or medieval guy, if you use this technique with a more square shape, you got some pretty solid looking padded armor. Nice tech to have in your back pocket at least. With the armor done, I mix green stuff and milliput together to make the medium length gloves that they wear. I use this mixture since I find it a bit easier to smooth without leaving a visible edge. I also made sure to trim the cuff off the sleeve before doing this, just to make it a bit easier. I considered carving in the texture of the gloves you see in the official art, but I decided to leave this texture off all of the small spots on the armor. Not only would it multiply the workload considerably, but if you're making an army of these guys, you could say that for HQs to make them stand out a bit more. For regular guys, I think this suffices. After all, you don't want to make every single one of your troops a heavy sculpting conversion job, otherwise you end up with an Eldar army that people bug you about on a fairly regular basis. When both arms have had their gloves and pauldrons sculpted, I temporarily attach the left arm to the torso with poster tack to know where to pose the head. I forgot to film myself making said head, but all I did was attach a leftover mix of putty to the face and sand it smooth, leaving a visor slit of sorts. I feel like using a different head as a base could improve the look, but I'm failing to really think of what head to use. Maybe a Krieger head? I don't know. This will be fine though, as it'll leave me plenty of room to sculpt the neck protection in the same way I sculpted the armor. With the neck protected, I attach the arms, backpack, and a little canteen of water. Overall, it's not the longest sculpting time, and with rows shaped so deeply, recasting this would definitely see the detail being reproduced to a good quality. Sculpting 5 or so different bodies with some pauldrons and recasting them could see a unit of dragoons come together pretty quickly. You just have to sculpt the neck area and the gloves, or hell, even leave the gloves off if you're not up for it. You could paint the hands and cuffs the same color, and nobody will be none the wiser when you're looking at a blob of like 20 of them. As for making the base, just as a very quick note, I went with a sandy base, grinding my usual clay cat litter down with a mortar and pestle to get a little bit of a finer particulate than just my sand. I glued it all on with some super glue and primed it with a white primer. I was thinking the white primer would make things a little easier to paint, but don't do that. Just prime it black. Painting the Vitrian Dragoons is very fast and very easy, and the first step is going to be the black clothing. I paint my black the same way I do all my black armor and whatnot, starting from a dark gray, which is why this white primer doesn't really benefit me in any way. Having a black primer just means the spots that you miss are hidden in shadow. You know, it's just easier. I give the whole model a dry brush with a neutral gray, then a more focused dry brush of a light gray. I grabbed a bright silver and base coated all of the glass armor bits. You could feasibly leave these as we've previously painted, but having a metallic base coat will help differentiate between the glass areas and the fabric areas. I put gold on the straps of the collar area and pluck out a few shards to sort of mimic the design of the reference picture. Now we move on to a shade. I started with a 1-to-1 mix of Drakenhof Nightshade and Glaze Medium. This is the old Drakenhof formula though, so it's a little stronger than the modern equivalent, so you may want to use a blue or dark blue from a brand like Army Painter, which their washes are just a little stronger than Citadel's current washes, but you know, just use whatever you want. This mix was applied to the entire model, which will put a little bit of life into the black of the fabric and tint the glass armor slightly, although you could just use black instead of blue as well. With that, the mini is done, unless you want to add a few highlights, but I think this is more than sufficient for just a basic blob guardsman. If you were batch painting like 30 of these guys, you could easily get the entire batch done in a single night using this method right here. When it came to the base, I was kind of torn, mainly due to the signature glass of their planet. On the art you can see that the glass is a metallic gray of sorts, but glass mainly gets its color depending on the chemical makeup of the sand used to make it. Additionally, I imagine the sand would be populated with some of the glass, so this is kind of what I ended up settling on. I'm not sure if I'm happy with it, but I mean, you're watching this video, so it's way too late to do anything about it now. I painted the base a regular deserty sand, pecking out any large base bits with a silver and dry brushing a little silver over the entire base. It's a light colored base that shows the sand and also contrasts with the darkness of the model. It features some shiny specks of glass shards in the sand, which is why we did the dry brushing, and even features some of the glass that the Mini is wearing on the ground, which is the larger chunks. Does it make sense? I think so. Does it look good? Let's just get to the spins.
So if you got this far already in the video without killing yourself, consider yourself very, very badass.
The Vitrian Dragoons are definitely one of the most stylish Imperial Guard regiments that don't really have a lot of lore and certainly don't have a lot of models. But I think using this very quick sculpting method here could definitely help bring these guys to life, unless somebody out there makes like an easily customized like 3D like group builder pack, you know, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. Now, I did leave out some details from the art, mainly like the square pattern of the padded armor, but like I said, if you're just making a squad of basic dudes, I think this works. Like, it's like a strategic negligence, you know? If you have a blob, you're not going to notice those details that I left off, but when you're making like a leader dude, then yeah, you know, you put in a little extra work to make him, you know, stand out. Overall, the design is not 100% of the way there. I'd say it's like 85, but you know, personally, that's a number I can be happy with. If I were making one model for like its own standalone video, then yeah, I'd put more effort into it. But for a group of 5, like I said, I'm happy with this. I'd like to thank everybody that watched to the end of the video, and in particular, I'd like to say a big thank you to my newest patron, Mr. Zeter0. The scraps of advertisement money that YouTube hands me is certainly helpful, but my patrons are super awesome people in general for allowing me to have the steady supply of cold hard cash that allows some of these projects to be done without hurting my finances too much. And especially since I'm hitting that point in my job where I think I'm going to be looking for a new one soon, the support from all of you guys and my patrons really helps me feel a little better about getting back on the job market, which is a nightmare. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, maybe learned something, or felt inspired to maybe work on a little kill team of your own Vitrian Dragoons. If you'd like to check out another desert-based faction, I will kindly direct you to my Monster Hunter-inspired Exodite army. I'm essentially fusing Monster Hunter with the Eldar Exodites, and I think it's pretty cool. People like it, you know, you might like it too. But until then, I will see you guys in the final video of this regimental series, so take care till then.